All right. In this section, we are actually going to start doing the hypothesis testing itself rather than just talking about it in theory or what it might look like. So we're going to be looking at testing a single proportion. So proportion or percentage. So now we're talking about discrete variables, the ones that are countable. Okay. So something like, 20% of people believe this. 15% of all M&Ms manufactured in a standard package are orange, whatever. Okay. Percentages or proportions is what we're dealing with. Now, one disclaimer, these notes, because of everything that was going on and I was trying to get them copied just in case there was some editing that I did not do. So I just would have rearranged some things. And so I'm going to go ahead and teach this in kind of that rearranged order. So just bear with me. Again, we're all doing what we can do under the circumstances. So let me walk you through the way a hypothesis test would be conducted. Okay. So according to a 2008 study by the Federal Trade Commission, 23% of all complaints in 2007 were for identity theft. Okay, so that would be like nationwide. In that year, Alaska had 301 complaints of identity theft out of 1,432 total consumer complaints. Does this data provide enough evidence to show that Alaska has a lower proportion of identity theft than 23%? So are they different, for example, from the rest of the nation? And then it says, test at the 5% level of significance. So one of the things I want to point out is when it says test at the 5% level of significance, that means that we are using that alpha is 0.05. And I'll explain more what that means, but that's a notation that we introduced in that last section with the type 1 and type 2 errors, okay? So first thing you need to do is verify that that sampling distribution is normally distributed. So how do we do this? There are two things that you need to do. Okay, first one is you need to ask if this is a binomial experiment. So is everything independent? So is one complaint independent of another? Yes. And are there just two outcomes? And in this case, yes, there are. Again, there can be lots of consumer complaints, but we're specifically looking at identity theft complaint or not an identity theft complaint. Okay, so yes, this is, again, we have independent and we have two outcomes. And then the other thing you need to check, and this is just to ensure you have a large enough sample that your distribution will be binomially distributed, you need to check if n times p times q is greater than or equal to 10. So remember, n is your sample size. So they sampled 1,432, or they had 1,432 complaints. P is going to be the proportion of people who complained about identity theft from the population, not just from Alaska, okay, but from the overall population. So that's 0.23 or 23%. And remember, Q is the percentage of people that had some other type of a complaint. Okay, so 100 minus the 23% is 77%. And that number should be greater than or equal to 10. And you will find out that yes, indeed, it is. Okay. All right. So once we know that's true, we can go ahead and use this particular type of test. There are other tests you use if you fail to meet either of those two criteria. Okay. So that's why we have to check. So write the null and alternative hypothesis. So our alternative hypothesis is that the proportion of people who had identity theft is 23%, so 0.23. And then our alternative is for Alaska, we think that that percentage might be smaller than 23%. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is on the next page, I actually have a spot for what you do on your calculator, but we're going to take a second to write this out right here. Okay, so on your calculator, how do we do this? Because our calculator is going to give us almost every one of these values that we need to come up with. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to hit your stat button. And again, those of you without the TI 83, 84, you'll have to Do a little looking around to see where yours is, okay? Then you're going to arrow over so that tests is selected, okay? So stat, arrow over to tests, and then you're going to see a whole list of tests, and the one that you want to select is the one proportion Z test, okay? On my calculator, it's number 5. It's probably around there for you, okay? But one prop for proportion Z test, that's the one you're going to look for, okay? So once you select that, then you're going to enter some things in your calculator, okay? The first thing it asks for is P0, okay? That is the null hypothesis value. Okay, so for you, for the null hypothesis, in this case, we are going to enter 0.23 or just 0.23. That's what you put in, okay? Then it asks you for an X value, okay? And it asks you for an N. The X is the number of people in the sample that had that certain characteristic. So for us, that X value is going to be the 301 people in our sample that had identity theft, and N is going to be the total number of people in our sample, so 1432. So you enter those numbers. Then the next thing it asks is it says prop, and then it's got either a not equal to P0, it's got a less than P0, and it's got a greater than P0. This is where you choose the kind of test that you want to do, okay? This is based on the alternative hypothesis. So if you look at our alternative hypothesis, it says we are testing less than 23%. And so we're going to select the less than P0 option, okay? And then go ahead and arrow down to calculate. I know for some of you it'll say color. You've got calculate, you've got draw, it doesn't matter, okay? That's not what we want. And so then we're going to pull some numbers off of our calculator screen, okay? The first one we're going to pull, and we're now doing number 3, is it says find the sample proportion P, and then that little caret above it is P hat, okay? Use a minimum of 4 decimal places. So P hat, looking at your calculator, and I'm going to go ahead and use 4 decimal places, should be 0.2102 by the time we round, okay? Just for the record book, how you find P hat, that is your sample proportion. So P hat, they're actually taking that 301 and dividing by 1432, and that's how they come up with that number, 0.2102. But again, your calculator gives it to you. You don't even have to type that out on your screen. You just copy the number, okay? So there's our sample proportion, P hat.